So just a reminder to folks, if you don't want to be viewed on the recording later on, you're welcome to change your name and to stay off camera. But we are recording this so future members can, or current members as well, can watch this in the future as part of their PD. So my name is Tyler Colburn. I am the almost an executive director. I'm not the executive director. That was a previous job that I had somewhere else. I am the professional development consultant with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. And you're here today for our lunch and learn on 6 steps to sustaining a satisfying social work career. If you're like me, you're probably thinking about renewals because we are in renewal season. And so as you're putting in your professional development hours, this is one that would be really well placed for the vicarious trauma and secondary stress around preventing burnout and self-care. But it is also a formal PD activity as well. You're also willing to able to claim it for that because it is an official webinar. But yes, we're going to be talking about the 6 steps to sustaining a satisfying social work career. Before we do that, I'm just going to go through a land acknowledgement here and also talk a little bit about our commitments here at the college. But I'm going to invite you folks to join me. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking from not Chibuktuk, actually. I'm actually in Punamulkutijik, which is colonially known as Dartmouth. That's the other side of the harbor. But it is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. Canada later reaffirmed the treaties in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, and they remain active to this day. So, just seeing some folks join here. I'm going to mute folks as they come in.
Probably pop by either.
Perfect. Sorry about that, folks. Encouraging you to go to the link that I put in the chat there, placenames.mapdev.ca, to find the name of the land that you're on. So if you're Mi'kma'ki like myself, if you click on this link, it'll tell you the Indigenous Mi'kmaq name for the land you're on. Again, I'm in Punamulkutijik, colonially known as Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and I'm really grateful to be here. When we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. There's a quote here at the bottom from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures that I really, really love. And it says, understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around. Oftentimes as humans, especially in a white supremacist settler colonial context, it's easy to see ourselves as distinct and separate from nature. But as we move towards decolonization and strive for justice and liberation, it's helpful to flip it, to recognize that we are expressions of nature. And so if you look at this link or this image on the right here, the tree stump and the human fingerprint, just draws to mind this idea that we're not so different from the nature around us. Oh, hi, Glenda. I see you're also joining from this area. Great. So as we consider our land acknowledgement and allyship with Indigenous folks, let us take a moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in the sacred work. So thinking of like land defenders and water protectors and the work that they've been doing ongoing for years to protect the nature that's all around us. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and the values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. And so may this session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. And a reminder, we're all treaty people. And so as we consider this idea of being treaty people, how does this impact what we do and how we do it? How will it guide our work together today and going forward? It's really important as well to move beyond just acknowledgements. We have to move into not just the truth part of truth and reconciliation, but reconciliation as well. And that is about changing behaviors and attitudes and policies and making sure resources are flowing in the right direction. And here at the College of Nova Scotia, we're committed to translating acknowledgement into action. We're seeking to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions. And we commit to doing what we can to become better treaty partners. And part of that is committing to learning and unlearning. It's also important to note, if you've been reading the news or looking at the news, There's been a lot of noise around lawyers from the federal government indicating that they don't believe that the government has a responsibility for clean drinking water for First Nations and Indigenous communities. And so while there's this push and this strive for truth and reconciliation and for many organizations to do better towards decolonization, it's also paradoxical because we have a federal government that is currently taking actions to continue limiting the rights and freedoms of Indigenous people. I just think it's important to note that acknowledging the land is so much more than just words. It's about deep practice and ongoing change. With this as well, we also want to talk about reparations for people of African descent. So the college firmly recognizes that reparations are both a moral and material obligation to atone the deep-rooted history of anti-Black racism within Nova Scotia and the broader Canadian context. It's important for me as a settler Canadian to acknowledge that the forces of settler colonialism are entangled with the same forces that led to the enslavement and displacement of people of African descent. So as we think about reparations at the college, we're thinking about restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. So ensuring that the things that we're striving towards as we seek to implement reparations, ensuring that they don't happen again. If you're curious about our statement on reparations, I'm going to just post a link here in the chat. I'm going to encourage you to take a look at that. I'm also going to encourage folks just to remain on mute if possible. Normally we have the call set up so that as you arrive, you're automatically on mute, and you must have missed that. Apologies. I'm just going to put some folks on mute. Reparations continued. So the history of people of African descent in Nova Scotia is marked by resilience, contribution, and profound influence on the province's social fabric. From the Black Loyalists and the Maroons to the Southern American Black refugees, the legacies of these communities have indelibly shaped Nova Scotia's cultural landscape. Their stories, marked by perseverance in the face of adversity, are central to our shared history and necessitate both recognition and restitution. Thinking about the many communities across the province, people of African descent and African Nova Scotians that have deeply influenced the makeup and I guess the current reality of Nova Scotia. And committing to these principles of reparations, the college aims to honor the significant contributions of African Nova Scotians and ensure a future where equity, justice, and respect for human rights are not just ideals, but realities for all. So thinking towards that future state of liberation. We stand dedicated to transforming this commitment into tangible actions that contribute to the healing, empowerment, and upliftment of African Nova Scotian communities, laying the groundwork for a more equitable and inclusive society. And then finally, just a note that, we commit to using our professional development to both learn new ways of thinking and understanding the work we do, and to unlearn assumptions and bias so we can ensure safer social work practice and a more just world for all people. This graphic on the left-hand side states, we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. So important as we take an intersectional lens, as we strive towards justice and liberation and equity, to take a side, to take a position and understand that all things are political and that power is always present. And we have to make sure that we're not remaining in a neutral stance. As social workers, we're all committed to social justice. It's deeply embedded within the Canadian Association of Social Work's Code of Ethics and Values and Standards of Practice. And our upcoming Code of Ethics are also deepening our commitment to social justice. So some framing from our time together. Your engagement in this session may not have immediate and or practical applications for you, and that is okay. So just inviting folks on the call to recognize that we all have expectations for how this call is going to go. Sometimes they line up really well. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes our learnings are right away, and sometimes they come after a little bit of reflection and processing. You don't have to agree with anything presented or shared, but we ask that you be open to seeing what happens. So just inviting a sense of curiosity, reminding folks that we're all complex humans on this call, and so our opinions might be different on certain things. Encouraging folks to take responsibility for yourselves by observing and learning from your conscious and unconscious responses. In any webinar or any lunch and learn or any gathering of people, there's always a risk that something is said that can bring up strong emotions or feelings for you. So just encourage you to be conscious of your reactions, your unconscious and your conscious reactions. And then finally, it's up to you to decide how much you want to share and participate. So this is a meeting with 40 people on the call right now. We will be engaging in larger group discussions. And so I always encourage people to push yourselves a little bit if that feels right for you. But also it's up to you to decide how much you want to share. And then lastly, we can all engage in ways that support others. So again, this is a meeting with complex humans. We're all social workers on this call. And just a reminder that this isn't a space for healing, but healing can happen here. So the process for today's discussion, Jim and Anne are going to provide a summary and overview of the article, 6 Steps to a Satisfying Social Work Career. We're going to have a large group discussion. And then just a reminder, this session is being recorded. So our hosts, I know I'm talking a lot. This always happens for the first 10 minutes where I'm just like going on and on and on and on. I'm going to pass it over to Jim and Anne here in a second. But want to acknowledge our hosts. So Anne Pirie is a retired social worker living in Sackville, New Brunswick, gorgeous Sackville, New Brunswick. She brings enthusiasm, professionalism, and she's also functioned in leadership and clinical roles. And then we have Jim with us as well. He's a retired social worker living in Kentville, Nova Scotia, with interests in mental health, family systems theory, politics, and social change. If you've been with the college for some time as a member, you've probably seen their faces before because they've been doing lots of wonderful PDs with us. But yeah, I'm so grateful that they're here today and that they're offering this session. And just a reminder, folks, to stay on mute. Apologies again, I should have set this up differently so that you wouldn't be on audio as soon as you arrived. But I think we're good to go. So, Jim and Anne, I'm going to pass it over to you. I will monitor the room, and if more people come in, I'll also be looking at the chat. Encourage folks to respond in the chat. If you feel compelled to say something or you have an observation or reflection, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll also be asking people to use their voices and to come on camera and microphone at certain points. But yeah, enough of me talking. Jim, Anne, I'm so grateful that you're here, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
Well, thank you, Tyler. I'm Jim. You'll meet Anne in a moment. We're delighted you've shown up. We've anticipated that you've read the article that we prepared a while back, and maybe you haven't. But if you have, we're hoping that you'll give us some feedback about what kinds of thoughts stood out for you in it. There are 2 questions that we're hoping that we can pursue in a conversation in the time we have before 1 o'clock. The first of those questions is, what suggestions in the article stood out for you? And the second question is, what personal attitudes and practices help you sustain a satisfying social work career? Because we understand that what we've written might have some value, but it's only a starting point in a conversation.
So we thought it would be helpful just to give you a few ideas, a few thoughts about why we wrote the article. And this opportunity is really a pleasure to support the profession. We wrote the article after noticing a number of reports about so many social workers being tired and distressed and discouraged or burnt out, and sometimes deciding to change jobs or leave our profession. And we began to think about our own experience and explored what elements helped sustain social workers and over the course of their careers, and consulted with some colleagues.
One of the things we want to do is to actually thank and identify those colleagues who helped us in our thinking and with the preparation of the article. Those folks are Harold Beals, Dominic Boyd, whose name I think I saw among those people on the call today, Kevin Fraser, Dermot Monaghan, Donald Pirie-Hay, Emma Shaw, Maggie Stewart, Annemieke Vink, who many of you will know from her work with the college, and members of the Pictou Network who are engaged by Dominic Boyd in the discussion.
And here we see the graph. All of those were social workers except for Donald Pirie-Hay, who happens to be my son. You'll see on this graphic slide, we're going to point out 2 truths and then the 6 steps or elements. So we began by identifying 2 truths. One is that we've chosen to work in a sea of trouble, an ocean of trouble, and we've agreed purposely to stand with people in their darkest moments.
And we also thought, as we were working on this, that it became very clear that it was hard to talk about the subject of how do you have a satisfying social work career without thinking about the workplace. So the workplace context always matters. And it certainly occurred to me as I've been thinking about this, that maybe the workplace is also part of that sea of trouble in lots of ways. And maybe it has been through the 100 years of our existence as a profession. But it certainly occurs to me as we think about the workplace context that if you haven't been attending union meetings, now might be the time to start.
So you'll see on the graphic, it's like a mobile. All of these pieces are elements that we've selected that seem to enable sustaining a satisfying social work career. And one at the top is to work on being a well-differentiated self. And that we see as the ability to know what we think, what one thinks, and what we feel, while also acting thoughtfully on the thoughts purposely and intentionally that come up.
The second step we identified, and we did this because we identified it this way because we're social workers, is the importance of owning a theory of human social behavior. A theory guides what we see and how we act, and not having one leaves a void.
The third one is that we've noted is to develop a sense of agency, knowing what we know and applying it, practice skills and confidence. And often we're working in integrated settings with other professionals, having to articulate what it is we do. So knowing how to turn our knowledge into focused interventions is part of that.
We thought as a fourth step for achieving a sustained satisfaction in a career is adopting practices for escape and self-renewal. And in that sense, it may be that positive addictions can be critical to our line of work. We need to have ways of getting away from what we're immersed in much of the time.
And a fifth step or dimension that we developed was to look at developing meaningful person-to-person relationships. This came up quite often as we were thinking about it and talking with others who'd been in workplaces where that was sustained with relationships or professional development, having supervision or someone to talk with. So it's important to have a friend, a family member, a colleague, a supervisor, or a mentor who walks with us as needed.
And the final or sixth step we described as embracing curiosity. The work we do might be difficult, but it's also exciting. And it's motivated or empowered by curiosity, by our interest and excitement in looking for what are the meaning of things.
And thinking about curiosity, we're curious to hear what you think about our questions. What suggestions in the article stood out for you? And what personal attributes and attitudes and practices help you to sustain a satisfying social work career? So we'd really like to hear from you.
So as we said at the beginning, our hope is that this will be a conversation. That's the way we've organized it, and we've got quite a few people. This is a large social work group today, but you know, part of being a group is to have people who listen and people who talk, and we're hopeful that you'll use the raised hand function if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment or have a bone to pick with what we had to say. And if you'd rather type your comment or question in the chat, you can do that. And what we'll try to do is alternate between the two, so that whether you raise your hand or type your question, you'll have a chance of being part of an active part of the conversation.
So I think the questions are also in the chat, but just to reiterate those, we're really interested in what suggestions in the article stood out for you, and what personal attitudes and practices help you to sustain a satisfying social work career.
So maybe, Tyler, we could remove the graphic now so we can see each other, which might help our conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Just did that.
There we go.
Mhm.
The question at hand right now is, what suggestions in the article really stood out for you, hey? So a reminder, folks can be in the chat, or you can come on to camera or microphone, use your voice. Love to hear from some people. I see Katie's raised her hand there.
Go ahead, Katie.
Well, I'm going to start by saying I have not read the article. I've just joined the college this month. I've come from another province, so I now have some reading to do. But just seeing your graphic, I think the 6 things apply well to me in my career. And with the 4th one, nope, sorry, it's the 3rd one, developing practice, skill, and knowledge. For me, what's also gone along with that is also knowing what my level of skill is and my scope of practice, and identifying that some of what I might experience as stress or tension or hopelessness in my work may have to do with my skill and knowledge, and that's okay. And I can either seek more skill, knowledge, or make a referral or work in another way with the person. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah.
So knowing what we know is really important in being able to feel it or
Yeah.
to get further support.
Yeah, it speaks to that. I think that's an interesting point, because it speaks to the nature of, to the aspect of our personal responsibility as social workers, and to what extent do we own responsibility for what we do, what we learn, how we organize ourselves. We're not necessarily only recipients of the environment, we also are players in it. So my guess is there must be another question or a comment or a thought out there. We've got 40 plus people in the room, and my guess is there's a lot of wisdom among each of those names that I'm seeing.
I'll say quickly that I reread the article this morning before this call, and I'd read it a few weeks ago. And I think the first thing that really popped out to me was, well, one, a bit of a duh moment for me of like that self-renewal piece. My goodness, are social workers really good at telling other people to take care of themselves, and then really great at maybe not following it so well for themselves. So seeing that in my own world right now, especially where I'm trying to create some new habits around self-care. But the other thing I'm noticing is, even just with all the steps, like how some of that is maybe more available to some people and then maybe less available to other people based on like intersectional identities and oppression. But it feels like more and more in my world anyway, life is so much more complex. We constantly have all this information being given to us, all this bad news, and there's really awful things happening all around the world. And so these steps are so important, and also sometimes I find them tricky because there's just such a volume, a weight of the challenges in the world that we're, seeing, witnessing, or participating in.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is challenging, and I guess all the more important to find things that work for each of us. So, I've tended to, I spent a big part of my social work career as a runner. And I spent, so it was I used to think in the 25 years I was running that it was an opportunity. It was one of the hardest things I did during the day. It wasn't exactly fun, but somewhere halfway through that run, I was able to think about the world in a different way. And there was usefulness in that. And everything else seemed a little easier in the course of my day. So it was an investment in me. You know, it had no benefit to anybody else, but I needed to take that time, but the payoff was real.
Jim, I'll be thinking about that tomorrow morning when I'm at the gym at 5:45 a.m.
Yeah.
Two things I saw in the chat. One person was asking, Shannon was asking, if we expand a little bit more on the work on being a well-differentiated self, and also just want to acknowledge Glenda's hand is up as well.
Mhm. Yes, well, that was our first step, a well-differentiated self. Which makes me want to comment on the, you know, we said there were 6 steps. I think when we started writing the article, we had 5 steps, and then we added another one, and then we added a couple of more because we said there were 2 things that people needed to consider, which are also things to consider. So are there 6 steps, or are there 600 steps, or is there only 1 step? And if there was only 1 step, it might be developing a well-differentiated self. The notion, I don't know, there maybe not everybody is kind of familiar with that concept, but the idea of a differentiated self comes from Bowen family systems theory, and it's the idea that someone who's well differentiated is able to they understand what they think about the world. They own a set of principles. They're able to live with those principles, and they're at the same time well connected with significant others in their life. And they're able to, but they're able to act on their principles rather than on the emotional tension in the relationship. That's a kind of shorthand way of saying something more about differentiation of self. And you might want to add something.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. What comes to my mind is being in the presence of a person who's experiencing very strong emotions, maybe hearing about past sexual abuse. And within, you know, myself as a social worker, I would be feeling that, be very aware that this is, there's a lot of tension and a lot of angst as that's being said. And it certainly in the early days when I was first hearing those stories, I was gobsmacked and thinking, okay, what do I do now? So I think being self-differentiated is being able to hear and feel the feelings in the presence of tension or big emotions, and to be able to be thoughtful and offer intentional comments and ideas that are useful. So being present to myself and the other, and also, as you're saying, act on the principles that I know about. And in our world right now, that's extremely important because of the kind of societal disruption that we're experiencing.
Maybe one other thing to say about being a differentiated self, another word that might be relevant is mature, like to be a mature person. And I think, you know, it may be related to the concept of individuation, which I think might be more of a Jungian concept, but differentiation of self is about being a self in relation to others. That connection between me and others in the world is at the heart of it.
Thanks for that, Jim.
Glenda's had her hand up, I think. That
Yeah.
might be the place we go. Glenda.
Hello?
There you are.
You see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. You know, I haven't read the article either because I didn't know there was an article to read before today, but I will follow up. And what struck my heart, myself on a feeling level here, the most so far is the truth of we've knowingly entered an ocean of trouble in our choice of you know, choosing to focus on this area of work, this important, most important area of work. And with that comes a lot of possibility for powerful personal growth and of oneself and one's heart, and on levels of strengthening one's ethics and character and learning and such good stuff. And also, though, when I started, I didn't realize I was going to be in such an ocean of trouble, you see, as I think a lot of grads don't realize, new grads, and that we're not really prepared fully. I mean, perhaps it's quite different now. I think it is in our training programs to prepare us for the level of structural harms and failures and barriers that are going to constantly get in our way of trying to do what needs to be done to support people who deserve this support 100%. So for me, I've worked as a relational trauma therapy focus as a therapist in that regard for 33 straight years. And I was a sustainable person, and those 6 elements, when I look at them, I can relate with every one of them and feel I did a heck of a lot in each of those, and I needed to. But then why was it that I still experienced a gradual accumulation of physical health changes and nervous system health changes? Well, because in part I always specialized in trauma, maybe, and that's very intense focus. But I think more than that, really, because I think that I could manage that actually through doing my own therapy over time, etc., and all of the good connections I had with colleagues and how we supported one another. It was really the structural changes. It was the way that a lack of funding long-term impacted the nonprofit organizations I worked in, how that had huge impacts on organizational levels and morale and just all sorts of levels. So to me, what I have to read your article, of course, and I'm excited to. But there's something about, and I don't know if it would fit in here or not, but my goodness, the structural level, and how do we come together more so to work with that level, and less sort of individual. You're on, you've got to do this individually, the self-care or whatever, more like collective, and then recognizing when, in many ways, people might not feel safe and not be safe to raise real concerns in workplaces or organizational levels or in the political levels or in systemic levels. And so then, what do we do about that? So I've talked a lot, I'll go now, but just some thoughts.
I am interested in you mentioned a little bit earlier in your remarks that, in a way, are we prepared well enough through our university programs? And you seemed a little bit ambivalent about that, but do you think we are prepared well enough, or do you think?
I don't know. I believe when, I had the opportunity to work with wonderful colleagues and was in a supervisory relationship in the sense of the therapeutic work with many. And as I noticed over the years, it seemed to be, particularly in some programs, there was a lot more being offered in terms of anti-oppressive practice and looking at the systemic issues and really recognizing all of these profound, harmful truths and the need for more advocacy work on many, many levels. So I think it's been changing, but yet still people seemed surprised, as I was, like whoa, all of this. Mind you, again, I chose to stay in for a long time without a break, this focus, which is nonprofit. So there's the funding issues, and that the focus would be relational trauma. But then I don't regret that. And I know a lot of colleagues too who did the same. And it's been so important. And yet there needed to be more support, because it wasn't a failure, I know, on my part not to do enough of all those areas. I know this, right? And my colleagues. So there was also the boundary setting is really difficult if you're a differentiated self and you know, okay, we need to, know what is fair and what's right, and we need to name. So speaking out, and then also boundary setting, like, that becomes very complex and difficult when there's need is so much greater than the resources and the funding. So I know not everyone has worked in the same sectors, so there's differences, but just speaking for my own sectors, I think there needs to be more done in those other areas. That's just my take, and I haven't read the article. And yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I do, one of the things that Glenda's comments make me think about is how important the college, and before we had a college, the Association of Social Work has been in my own career and experience as a vehicle to focus on some of those issues that Glenda talked about. For me personally, that's been part of my network of support.
Jim and Anne, I just want to acknowledge some of the comments that are coming into the chat here and just read a few of them out as we go. People are responding to that first question. And one person writes, the thing that resonated with me the most was what Jim said about how the system can be part of the, quote, stormy water, unquote, in the image. Also this embracing curiosity piece and how that's very interesting. As I feel this deeply and lack many chances or resources to look deeper into topics I would like to explore, especially around social justice. I feel school met my curiosity needs much easier, and I haven't felt that full sense. And so the acknowledgement, like this exploring and learning and gaining new knowledge is not as easy outside of school sometimes. And some questions on where to find the article. So I just posted that in the chat as well. Direct link.
Do you want to speak to that, Tyler, where to find the article? I know you posted it in the chat.
Yeah, so there's two places you can find the article. One is on the Eventbrite. There is a link to it, and it takes you to the New Brunswick Association. And so then in the chat, I also put the direct link into the New Brunswick Association. It's from July 2023. It's on page 6 of their newsletter.
Thank you.
Just the embracing curiosity. For me, an anecdote is I can remember being in social work school, which was a very long time ago, and decided to speak to one of the professors about a problem that I was aware of and that I engaged in and couldn't see a way to deal with. And he spent a bit of time with me, and as I was going down the steps from his office, he came out and just got my attention and said, "And isn't all this exciting?" And it was one of those moments when kind of a reframing that was very, very helpful to me, because in fact it was. I mean, it was a puzzle, and it was a meaningful puzzle, and it was worth spending energy and time on. It wasn't only trauma; it was also enlivening. But I think that's part of what social. I tend to think that social work has, gives us a gift of exposure to that sea of trouble. So long as we know that's what we've decided to get into.
But I think the posture of curiosity, it really comes from a place of compassion for us as social workers, and humility. But how sustaining it is when someone is interested in another person and wanting to know more about what's happening.
Yeah, and as I hear you both talk about curiosity, I think about how so much of the settler, colonial, white supremacist context strives for clarity and for saying this is this and it's nothing else. Black and white thinking, either or thinking, and how it is a a choice we have to make to stay curious, because the world is quickly trying to give us answers all the time. Say, this is this and this is that. And I remember I once dated someone and then we were watching a movie and I kept saying, this is this and this is that. And he's like, a thing can just be a thing. I was like, oh, no, if you look at it from this position, it's this thing. If you look at it from this position, this thing. And I think it's important to kind of uphold that sort of worldview. I'm talking a lot. I see there's hands up. So I think, Dom, your hand was up, and then I think Katie.
Okay, great. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. So I really appreciated being involved in this project, and I'm grateful that you're doing this workshop today. It's good to see you again, Anne, after many years. And Jim, good to see you. And I just wanted to comment on the agency thing in particular. And for me, this field, I've been in the field for close to 40 years. A sense of agency has always been a big part of it, that I can make a difference. And the other day, someone asked me what I'd like to have on my tombstone. And I thought, he made a difference. Like that's really what it boils down to for me. I belong to a choir, and we sang a Michael Jackson song recently. And there's a line in it that goes, heal the world, make it a better place. And every time I say those words or sing those words, it moves me. So I just wanted to share that with people. We can make a difference. Never give up. Thanks.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I mean, the choir is an interesting analogy, because is that a means of escape for you, or how do you think about your choir activity?
I love singing. And to be part of a group, there's about 50 of us in that. I've made some new friends that way. And people like to hear songs, being sung. It's an opportunity for people from all sort of walks of life to come together and listen to the concert we do. We do one in May, and we do one in December, and they're well attended. So yeah, it's a great way to bring people together, and music can bring us so many different feelings. But hope has got to be one of them. Yeah. And we need hope. We need lots of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dom.
Thanks.
Good to have positive escapes.
Yeah.
Katie.
Just lower my hand here. Practice with all these Zoom skills. There we go. Oh, yeah, there we go. I was listening to Anne talk about embracing curiosity, and what was said really resonated for me, because it moved the discussion or the thought about curiosity in a way that I was thinking about it, but hadn't really made the dots. And that was the curiosity in practice, to sit with someone who has curiosity about your life and your experience and how things could look different is really powerful. And using that curiosity in our practice, also just in the world around us. So I just wanted to get back to that and say that resonated for me, Anne, when you were, or that's what it made me think of. I don't know if that was your exact intent, but that, I kind of linked it back to, developing practice, having a curiosity always. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And then I just wanted to share just two thoughts or two theories, and I'm using quotes because I don't know if they're in our academia or validated theories, but some theories that I've always carried with me. And I'm sure they have roots in other theories, but I've just carried some really succinct lines that have helped me. And that is that, and I'm going to put in the context of the stormy water or the ocean of trouble, that people in that ocean of trouble will always find a way to cope and manage and adapt without me. It might not be a pro-social way, but they have their way, and they've got as far as they've gotten to come and see me. So that idea that people will always cope in some form without me has always been really helpful when I look at the humans and position myself in the relationship with them. And another one has always been this idea that, and I picture it in my mind, I'm kind of visual at times, but there's really just a thin thread that puts the social worker and the client apart. And at any given time, we can be closer or farther away from that thread. And at any given time, I've always carried this notion that just based on circumstance, I could easily cross that thread and be on this other side where I'm seeking services. And I've just felt that that's kind of helped me. I want to use the word equality or equal, or try to, to kind of balance the power, even though I know it's always there. Yeah, but I don't know where I picked that up, that we're really only a thread apart, but it's really been helpful for me. So I just wanted to share those thoughts.
I hear you punctuating that there's more that binds us as humanity than separates us, although we may each be uniquely different, of course.
Yeah.
I think, in the article, one of the things we do comment on is that in some ways our relationship with social work with the people we might refer to as clients is a relationship of equals, of people who, as you're pointing out, are not very different from ourselves, more alike than unalike. Also, that emphasis on that way of thinking about curiosity, of sitting with someone and learning more and more about them, is an act of love, I think, at some level, an interest in the other that I think is a form not only of connecting, but of valuing. I used to have a dentist for a long time, and when he arrived in the room and I was in the chair, and he would say, "How are you?" And at that immediate moment, he would stick the rubber dam in my mouth, and and I never did, over a course of several years, have any opportunity to actually tell him how I was. And I thought, he missed a lot.
I notice that in groups of children where I do some volunteer work, simply telling stories and then asking about the children's experience, what they liked best, what was the most important part. And there may be things they want to leave out or things that were especially for them, but simply asking, and then they share their experience. It's quite a connection, really, between people.
We've got a few minutes left, and remember that the questions, for those of you who've read the article, you might be able to think about this one. What suggestions in the article stood out for you? But the other question is, what personal attitudes and practices help you sustain a satisfying social work career? We're interested in whatever anybody has to say about either of those things.
I can say, and this will be familiar to anyone who's worked with me, injecting joy and whimsy wherever possible is something that's an attitude and practice for me in the work that I do. I try to bring that wherever I can, and I often think about like the world that we're working toward, the one that's more just, harmonious, equitable. It's going to be joyful. It has to be. Otherwise, why are we doing this work? That doesn't mean to say that, cracking jokes when things are serious. That's not the point. It's just noting that there are opportunities to bring lightness into the work.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I just got an email from my stepdaughter in Vancouver, and she's a social worker and has been for a number of years. And one of the things she mentioned that struck her was the importance of having a sense of humor, and she really tries to practice that and be intentional about that in her workplace where it's appropriate.
You know, I think the experience of working on this project has made me think more about the workplace itself, which is not the place I began in my own head in thinking about this general topic of work satisfaction. And I mean, it is an interesting question still, but what is it that's made our workplaces not so helpful? Maybe part of the sea of trouble more than a ballast against that trouble. I don't know if anybody has thoughts about that, or about what we might need to do to take that on.
What gets tricky, Jim, is Dominic here, is I've found was having a manager who was not a social worker, didn't really understand sufficiently what social workers do, and that I would clash with from time to time. And there were a couple of times when I ran into problems with managers in my life and had to leave and move on to something else. So that was something that really was quite challenging. But I chose to see it as an opportunity to explore new horizons and move on and rebuild. And it also gave me some insight into what other people struggle with when they have problems at work as well. So I can say, yeah, I've been there. I know what that's like.
You know, my experience of being a social worker over several different roles, but it has been the ongoing need to define what a social worker is, rather than allowing oneself to be defined by those people who aren't social workers, who have some kind of authority. But that's been a theme in my own work, but one that's the value in that at some level is that it forced me to think more continuously and clearly about what's the nature of social work, what do I want social work to be in my own life, and it's kind of it's been that one of those things that's helped me stay engaged with the profession as a source of support.
I got to go, but thank you very much for this great discussion. Appreciate the work you've done.
Well,
Thanks,
for
Dominic.
contribution. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you. Take care.
Any other thoughts or comments?
Somebody we're close to the end of our time, but there may be if there's a final thought, a final question, final criticism. Well, maybe we're reaching that point where people are thinking they need to leave. Or I guess I want to say as we get toward the end, that if you haven't read the article, I hope you'll take an opportunity to do that, to make the information Tyler's put in the chat a way to access that. And if you have further comments you want to share with us, we would be glad to hear them. And I'm wondering, Tyler, if we could put the graphic image back up as a way to help.
There we go. Well, I also want to say thank you for joining us. And you see the graphic here. Jim, you may want to comment on what we've said.
Well, what we tried to say in the article, and which some of you will have read, and maybe some of you will read later, is that we framed this as 6 steps to sustaining a satisfying social work career, and we thought that those 6 steps might be described as developing a higher level, a better level of differentiation of self, to own a theory of human social behavior, believing that as social workers, that's the area which we must know, we must have a theory about, to develop a sense of agency or practice skills so that we can put a theory into practice. Because we're involved in intensity, we need to find ways to step back from that. And so escape and self-renewal were another step that we talked about. And we understood from our experience and exploration that having meaningful person-to-person relationships, a network of relationships, is highly important to lasting over time and with a level of satisfaction. And as we've talked about quite a bit today, embracing that sense of curiosity or excitement or wanting to know more is part of the value of being a social worker.
Thanks, Jim. And from today, a number of these elements seem to have resonated with you. And Tyler, you can comment on this as well as you've been following the chat. But certainly the idea of working on being a differentiated self, you've commented on that it makes a difference, knowing what we know and being able to apply it, but also seeking support when we don't know. That self-renewal is seen as important, practicing that regularly. And it seemed that the ocean of trouble resonates for us a great deal in terms of the work, in terms of workplaces and the context we're living in. So the need for acting in a unified way around systems is important. And that brings in the role of the association and of our unions, for example. Theories help us find our way through an ocean of trouble. And you noted that curiosity about life and person and about ourselves in seeking to understand and knowing what we can apply and when we need to ask for more support or to refer. Tyler, are there other comments you might want to make about what has resonated today?
I think from the folks in the chat, the curiosity piece was something that was really alive for folks. We heard that through the chat as well. I think, as well, it's, all these pieces of the 6 steps kind of work in a sort of entangled way. And so experiencing a lot of gratitude for you folks in the chat, a lot of gratitude with the wisdom, the insights that you're sharing. And if the folks on the call are anything like me, this serves as like a well-needed reminder that I have to have often. Right? Because I think the pieces of this are all alive in us. We all have agency to make our careers satisfying, and we face barriers based on lots of intersecting oppressive dynamics. But it's important to recognize that we do have agency and that we can make our careers more satisfying. And it's a process of ongoing reflection and change. So yeah, seeing a lot of gratitude for you folks. That's the thing I really most want to highlight. People are really grateful for being here and for you folks sharing your wisdom. With that, I might transition towards the end just because we have a couple more minutes here. Is that okay? Jim, do you want to speak?
I only want to say thank you to the college and to everyone for participating, and for those who read the article, thank you for doing that. And if you haven't read it, I hope you do. And to reiterate how interested I would be to hear whatever kind of comments you want to make about it once you've read it.
For sure. If there are ideas or questions, that would be wonderful to hear. Thank you so much for this time together.
Yeah, and on behalf of the college, thank you to Anne and Jim for being here today. And some of you folks might have their emails, you might not. So if you have questions or reflections on this presentation or the article, you can send them to me as well, and I can forward them on to Jim and Anne. Also, just wanted to quickly highlight some of our upcoming events. So we are nearing towards the end of the calendar year, but we do have some more events for professional development. On October 29th, we have our Communities of Practice. So this is a connection and discussion space for an hour and a half. On November 6th, we're doing our final PD event, which is our Supporting Our Self-Care. Again, around connection and discussion. So working with your peers and colleagues in social work to, I guess, interrogate and reflect on and think about this idea of self-care. On November 20th, we have an event in partnership with the IWK and the Healthy Populations Institute for National Child Day. If you're in the Chipuktuk area, we are doing it at the Halifax Central Library. The Eventbrite for that is in the chat if you'd like. Also a reminder, we are still accepting nominations for our awards. So you go into our website and there, you'll see a link right at the very top for our awards. We're accepting nominations November 24th. And so we're looking for some nominations for social workers that you know and love, that you think are doing really great work, and would love to get some more nominations. And then, of course, you can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and you can sign up for our newsletter at nscsw.org if you're not already signed up. And then finally, for folks, as you're checking out and leaving, I know some folks have already stepped off, it's always helpful to share something in the chat as you leave. So one idea that you heard that you will take with you into your practice, or anything else that you'd like to share to help close out this session for you. With that, I'll stop sharing and just want to say thanks again to Jim and Anne for being here. It's lovely to work with you too, and I'm looking forward to doing more.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Forwarding here as well, if I can figure out how to do that. Yeah.